Imagine the pain of having to bury the most famous son on the planet. And even harder, imagine having to hear every kind of speculation and judgment about his end while your own heart was broken. In January 1978, the atmosphere at Graceland was one of absolute mourning. But while the outside world created theories about what happened, Vernon Presley made a decision. Even with failing health, he resolved to break his silence one last time. He didn't agree to speak to promote the King of Rock. He spoke to defend his son's honor and tell the truth from a father's perspective. What he said in these pages was a final and necessary outburst to protect the family's image against the cruel rumors of the time. Stay tuned, because starting now, we are going to open the pages of Good Housekeeping magazine from January 1978. You will learn exactly what Vernon Presley said in this historic interview and the emotional details he revealed. Follow along now.
First of all, I want to say that telling this story is going to be difficult now that Elvis is gone. Those of you who have lost loved ones, who have suffered what I am suffering now, will understand what I mean. Elvis's death was so sudden that it will be years before I can accept the fact that it really happened. However, even in the midst of my sorrow, I have been greatly comforted by the thousands of fans who loved Elvis and who expressed their sympathy. They know they will never see him perform again, but they will always cherish the memory of the joy he gave them, just as I will. My love for my son began even before he was born, on January 8, 1935. At that time, there was almost no one poorer than my wife Gladys and me. But we were thrilled and excited when we learned we were going to be parents. I was only 18 years old, but during Gladys's pregnancy, it never occurred to me that I wouldn't be able to take care of her and the baby. Elvis's birth was long and difficult for my wife, and as her labor pains continued, I became frantic. My parents were at our house with us, along with a midwife, who told us when it was time to call the doctor. After what seemed like an eternity to me, a boy was born. Dead. I was desolate over the loss of our child. But then, my father placed his hand on my wife's stomach and announced, "Vernon, there's another baby here?" At the time Elvis was born, medicine hadn't advanced enough for a doctor to predict twins, so their arrival took us completely by surprise. Our boys looked alike, but I don't think they were identical twins. Even though the older one was born lifeless, we named him Jesse, in honor of my father. The younger one we named Elvis, for me, since Elvis is my middle name. We chose the middle names of Garin for Jesse and Aaron for Elvis because we knew a couple whose twin sons had those names. Of course, Elvis and I wondered, over the years, if his life would have been drastically different had his brother lived. I concluded that it wouldn't have been, because I believe Elvis's career and his contribution to the world were destined from the very beginning. For during his life, certain things happened that convinced me that God had given my wife and me a very special child for whom he had some very special plans. Gladys and I were so proud of Elvis and enjoyed him so much that we immediately wanted more children. But for reasons no doctor could understand, we didn't have any more. While Elvis grew from a toddler into a lively boy, we consulted doctors about our failure to have another child. We also prayed for it. There was no medical reason for my wife not to conceive again, but it didn't happen. When Elvis was about 10 years old, the reason was revealed very clearly to me in a way I cannot explain. I can only say that God spoke to my heart and told me that Elvis was the only child we would have, and the only child we would ever need. Elvis was a special gift who would fill our lives completely. Without little Jesse, who was born dead, without the other children we hoped to have, we understood that we were an extraordinarily complete family circle. As soon as I realized that Elvis was meant to be an only child, I felt as if a burden was lifted from me. I never again wondered why we didn't have additional sons and daughters. It is difficult to describe the feelings that Elvis, his mother, and I had for each other. Although we had friends and relatives, including my parents, the three of us formed our own private world. Elvis was a good child who rarely gave us trouble. I spanked him a few times, but now that I think about it, I believe it wasn't even necessary. I was a deacon at the Assembly of God Church in East Tupelo and used to take Elvis to church with me every Sunday. Later, after we moved to Memphis, he was baptized in my church, but neither the Assembly of God nor any denomination ever completely owned him. Elvis grew up very close to his mother. He used to call her by a pet name, Baby. He was also close to me, so we had a wonderful and balanced family relationship. I didn't pick a goal for him and then push him in that direction. Some parents want their kids to be football players or lawyers or whatever. I just wanted Elvis to do whatever made him happy. When he was a boy, I asked him to go hunting with me, but when he replied, "Daddy, I don't want to kill birds," I didn't try to persuade him to go against his feelings. There was a terrible day when Elvis was about 6 years old. He had developed acute tonsillitis with such a high fever he was on the verge of convulsions. Gladys and I were afraid we were going to lose him. Even our doctor admitted there was no hope. "I can't do anything else," he told us. "Maybe you should call another doctor." That, in effect, is what we did, because my wife and I turned in prayer to the greatest healer of all, God. I believe in prayer. I believe in miracles. So that day I prayed to God that He would miraculously heal our son. My wife and I prayed together and separately, and that night I could see that Elvis was better. God had worked the miracle we had asked for, again assuring me that our son's life was special. I don't mean to say that I knew Elvis was going to be famous, because back then the idea never crossed my mind. A person doesn't need to be a singer or a movie star or a president to fill an important role in the world. He can be a truck driver or a farmer or anything else and make his contribution. I just knew that Elvis had a contribution to make in one way or another, and that the Lord seemed to have His hand on him. The writer of a lying and mean-spirited book about Elvis said on TV that we Presleys were nothing but poor white trash. Well, I want to answer that here, because his comment angered the entire state of Mississippi. Poor we were, I'll never deny that, but trash we were not. In fact, I don't really know what being trash means in that sense. There were times when we had nothing to eat but cornbread and water, but we always had compassion for people. When I was growing up, we never had any prejudice. We never looked down on anybody. Neither did Elvis. When Elvis reached his teens, we all moved to Memphis. Elvis may have hated leaving his friends in Mississippi, but if he felt that, he didn't tell me anything about it. He was a good son. Gladys and I trusted him so completely that we would go to a movie and let him have friends over for a party while we were gone. Maybe there was a beer to drink, but that was as wild as it got. To tell the truth, Elvis never drank much, although one time he almost lost his life drinking peach brandy. He got a bottle and thought it tasted so good that he drank a little more and a little more until he had drunk too much at once. But he was never a heavy drinker regularly. Even after Elvis was in high school, we continued to be such a close family that he didn't spend a night away from home until he was 17 years old. When that happened, my wife and I phoned all night to make sure he was okay. In high school, Elvis met a girl named Dixie Locke and decided he was in love. Gladys and I thought maybe they would get married because Dixie was a very nice girl and Elvis thought the world of her. It didn't work out, but I still hear from Dixie to this day. Until he was almost grown, I had no idea what Elvis was planning to do with his future. It turned out he wasn't too sure either. I remember right after he graduated from high school, I went into the bedroom and found him lying on the bed. "Son," I asked him, "what do you want to do now? Do you want to go to college? Because if you do, we'll manage to send you. Do you want to go to work? What do you want to do next?" Well, Elvis told me later that those questions like to have scared him to death because they led him to the conclusion that he had to make a decision. Then he told me, "Daddy, I want to be an entertainer. I want to sing with a gospel quartet." "You do whatever you want to do," I said, "and we'll help you in everything we can." It was in 1954 that Elvis decided to give his mother a record as a gift. He went to Sun Records and recorded his first two songs, "My Happiness" and "That's When Your Heartaches Begin." There was a gospel quartet starting about this time called the Songfellows, and Elvis auditioned for them. They turned him down because they said he couldn't sing. Later, after he had made some records professionally for Sun and they were doing very well, Elvis came to me and said, "Daddy, you know the Songfellows? They want me to join them now." My answer to that was, "Forget the Songfellows. You're doing well with what you have, and I wouldn't change that." Elvis's records turned into regional hits. He had gotten a manager, Bob Neal, who had organized some tours for him around the South. He came home from one of those tours talking about a big man he met, how smart he was and all that. He was talking about Colonel Tom Parker, who was packaging shows at the time. Elvis seemed to be leaning toward the Colonel as a manager. Gladys and I warned him that we didn't know anything about this man, and anyway, he had an agreement with Bob Neal. However, the next time Elvis came home from a tour, he told us he wanted Colonel Parker to manage him. Since Elvis was a minor, his mother and I had to sign his contracts, so we went to Little Rock, where Elvis was doing a show, to meet the Colonel. This was in 1955. He seemed like a smart man, but we still didn't know much about him, so we didn't sign. A little later, we met the Colonel again in Memphis, and this time he had a character witness with him, country singer Hank Snow, I believe. Elvis was so determined to go with the Colonel that we bought out the contract from Bob Neal and changed managers. My son's success came suddenly. His record of "Baby Let's Play House" reached number 10 on the national country charts. Then, later in 1955, RCA bought Elvis's recording contract from Sun and gave Elvis a bonus. He started making appearances with Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey, Milton Berle, and so on. But it was his TV appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show that attracted the most attention. The next thing you know, he was on his way to Hollywood. Like most people in Mississippi and Tennessee, my wife and I heard pretty crazy stories about Hollywood. But when Elvis was asked to go out there to make his first picture, we weren't alarmed, just proud and happy, because he was starting to do what he wanted to do. Soon after, when a genuine star, Natalie Wood, came to Memphis to visit us, my wife treated her as naturally as if she had been one of Elvis's school friends. Natalie was just a girl at the time, only 16 years old, and a very nice kid, not snobbish or affected in the least. Elvis almost never watched the movies he made because he didn't like most of them. He was paid $1 million per picture plus 50% of the net, so he was well paid for his work. But he never had script approval or control over the songs in his pictures, or over anything else. A few years ago, he had been asked to do A Star Is Born with Barbra Streisand, but he didn't do it. I don't know why.
Recently, Elvis had thought about going into production so he could star in a picture he would actually like. He had gone so far as to start working on a script. Elvis learned not to pay much attention to criticism or the lies that circulated about him. He wasn't even worried about the book 3 of his former bodyguards wrote recently. That hurt him, but only because he was surprised that old friends would turn on him that way. At first, the brutal attacks provoked against him by some critics upset him a little. But during his 22 years in the spotlight, he learned to shrug it off. Elvis always said, "The truth will prevail." He never forgot the philosophy expressed in the text, "The Penalty of Leadership" by Theodore McConmess. It said in part, "In every field of human endeavor, he that is first must perpetually live in the white light of publicity. The reward is widespread recognition. The punishment is fierce denial and detraction. That which is good or great makes itself known, no matter how loud the clamor of denial." He was able to shrug it off when, during the last years of his life, he heard rumors that he was using strong stimulants. Elvis took medication of various kinds, but everything was prescribed. For a while, he took diet pills, but he gave them up 3 years ago because he was afraid of them. After that, when he wanted to lose weight, he did it by cutting down on food or fasting. In fact, he had fasted for the last 24 hours of his life. He took sleeping pills because he felt he needed 8 to 10 hours of sleep to perform well. Quick pause here. This is one of the most controversial parts of the story. Vernon defends tooth and nail that Elvis's use of medication was a medical necessity to handle the routine and not an addiction. What is your honest opinion? Do you think he really believed that, or was he just trying to protect his son's image against the press of that time? Leave your opinion here in the comments, and let's continue with the interview.
Sad voice. Not long before he died, he had a very thorough physical exam. The doctors found that he had some liver damage, a colon problem, and high blood pressure. That worried me more than the rest. Elvis took prescribed medication for his blood pressure and may have taken an occasional painkiller. Because he was basically a night person, he didn't get out of doors as often as I thought he should, so I used to talk to him about it and urge him to get more sun. Then he would make a point of sitting by the pool. But he preferred to stay awake late at night and sleep by day. I am sure he didn't use heavy, illicit substances for several reasons. First of all, he had seen what those things had done to people he knew, and he didn't want to end up like that. Also, for the sake of his daughter Lisa, he wouldn't have used such substances. On the other hand, the story that Elvis shot at the TV set is true. But he was in his own house and shot at his own TV set, and when he did it, he could afford to buy a new one. I bet there isn't a person reading this story who hasn't sometimes felt so frustrated looking at some TV show that they didn't feel like throwing their shoe at the screen or something like that. Elvis had a legal gun permit. I saw him pretend he was going to draw the gun sometimes to scare someone as a joke, but he wasn't crazy by any means. The subject of Elvis using a gun brings up the danger he was often in. The time I was most scared for his safety was early in his career, in Jacksonville, Florida. He was performing on a flatbed truck, and when he tried to get to his dressing room trailer, the crowd simply surrounded him. The fans rocked his trailer so hard that he tried to get back to the stage. But again, the crowd swept him up, tearing at his clothes until he was left with nothing but his pants. He had bleeding scratches under his arms where his shirt had been torn off. I had never seen anything like that before. I thought Elvis was going to be killed. The crowd was as out of control as a lynch mob. Sad voice. Elvis, though, had his worst scare just a few years ago at the Las Vegas Hilton. We received a call from Los Angeles saying that a man was on his way to kill him on stage. The man on the phone said that for $50,000, he would tell us who the guy was and how to intercept him. The FBI took the threat very seriously, and so did I. So seriously that I told the agents to tell the man we would pay. But somehow the contact broke off, and on Elvis's opening night, we thought an assassin might really be in the audience. The hotel asked Elvis not to go on, and so did I. There is no denying that he was scared, but he insisted on doing that show, and the rest of the engagement. And as you know, nothing happened. We received kidnap threats from time to time, but they didn't worry us much, since we thought a competent kidnapper wouldn't warn the intended victim of what he was planning to do. Much has been written about Elvis's romances. Naturally, I don't know everything that happened between Elvis and the various girls in his life. I gave advice when he asked. I was there when he needed me. But I didn't pry. However, I know he was a man who liked women, and who always needed a special woman with whom he could share things. I think he was like most people. He needed to love and be loved. He dated many girls in Los Angeles, Memphis, and other places, and was serious about several of them. At one period, it looked like he and Anita Wood were going to get married, because when two people date for 6 years, you suspect they have something serious in mind. And he liked Barbara Hearn, a very lovely girl, very much. His mother and I didn't try to influence Elvis's choice of a wife any more than we tried to influence his choice of career. We didn't care who he married, as long as she was the girl with whom he would be happiest. Gladys had died before the army sent Elvis to Germany, where he met Priscilla Beaulieu. I had remarried when Priscilla came to Memphis to finish high school, so she stayed with my second wife, Dee, and me. Being the daughter of an Air Force officer, Priscilla had been raised to be disciplined and strong-minded, but she is also a tender and loving girl. I believe Elvis's marriage to her failed simply because he realized after the marriage that he didn't really want to be married. When he was traveling, it wasn't practical for Priscilla to go along all the time, especially after Lisa was born. These separations put a strain on their relationship. I want to emphasize that although he had to leave her often, Elvis was crazy about his daughter Lisa, and she adored her father. When Lisa wasn't in school and he wasn't on the road, she would come to Memphis and they would play together at his home, Graceland, for hours. Many people have asked about the women who shared the last years of Elvis's life. Of all of them, I think Linda Thompson was the best for him. She was always with him, worrying about him, and although I don't know why they broke up, that may have been one of the reasons. Possibly, Elvis felt that her care was starting to smother him.
This statement from the father is very strong. Many fans consider Priscilla the great love of Elvis's life, but Vernon himself states categorically here that Linda Thompson was the best partner for his son. I want to know what you think. Who do you think really made Elvis happier? Comment Priscilla or Linda down below. Let's see the outcome of this story.
Sheila Ryan was another very fine girl. I don't know why she and Elvis stopped seeing each other, but I was surprised when she married someone else so soon after the breakup. I never knew Ginger Alden well. She isn't very talkative, but a while ago, Elvis told me he had fallen in love with her. "This is the love I have been searching for," he said. "I want more children, a son, and I want Ginger to be the mother of my children." After that, Ginger and Elvis came to show me her engagement ring. That was one of the few times I saw her smiling. I assumed they were going to get married, but nothing happened, and whenever I tried to talk to Elvis about Ginger, he seemed upset. Finally, just a day or so before he died, I said to him, "I keep hearing and reading that you're going to announce your engagement. Is that right? When are you going to get married?" "Only God knows," said Elvis. I got the feeling that maybe he was changing his mind about the marriage. The newspapers have misinterpreted the fact that neither Priscilla nor Ginger were mentioned in Elvis's will. In answer to that, I want to point out that Ginger had already gotten her share of gifts from Elvis. As for Priscilla, she didn't expect to be mentioned because Elvis had already made his financial settlement with her when they divorced. Stories have misrepresented the details of Elvis's private life in every possible way. Whatever his private life was, none of his employees, friends, or associates ever went without anything they wanted or needed, whether it was Cadillacs or diamond rings and furs for their wives. Elvis gave lavishly because it was his nature to be generous. He wanted to share his good fortune with everyone who was close to him. I remember a time not too long ago when I felt he was carrying too large a crew, so I advised, "You don't need all of them, especially some who just seem to be out for what they can get from you." Elvis stopped me cold, answering, "Daddy, you see their wants. I look beyond their wants and can see their needs." Although Elvis never hid, as erroneously reported, he liked privacy, just as we all do. To spend time in his room, reading, or talking with one or two good friends. I spent some of the happiest moments of my life sitting and talking with Elvis. A few days before he died, Elvis and I talked at Graceland for 5 or 6 hours about all kinds of things, until I finally said, "Son, I have to go home now and get something to eat." "I know, Daddy," Elvis told me, "but I want you to know that I really enjoyed this." So did I. There are so many unanswered questions about Elvis's death for which I must find answers. How long had he been lying on the floor before his body was discovered? Why didn't anyone at Graceland wonder where he was and if he was all right? These are two of the questions I want answered. I know he hadn't been able to sleep the night before he died and had played racquetball around 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. So, what happened? I want to know. Joe Esposito, one of Elvis's staff members, was with me in the office when he got a call from the house and told me he had to go up there immediately. I continued with some work until the phone rang again, and Patsy, our secretary, answered it. "It's Joe," she said. "He sounds funny." I took the phone and Joe told me, "Mr. Presley, come quick. Elvis isn't breathing." I haven't been well for some time, so Patsy had to help me to the house. As soon as I saw Elvis, I knew immediately that he was gone. The things that happened after that are hard to put into perspective. Some were so unbelievable, and I was so sad that I could hardly understand what was going on. For example, I paid no attention to security. I never dreamed that one of Elvis's cousins would take a picture of him in his casket and sell it to a sensationalist newspaper. Nor, when I met Caroline Kennedy, did I guess that she had come to the funeral to do a story. In fact, when we were introduced, I didn't know who she was. I was with my mother and my sister when Priscilla came in with someone she introduced as Caroline Kennedy. I still thought of President Kennedy's daughter as a little girl, so I didn't identify the young lady until after she had left me. Then I heard someone say, "That was President Kennedy's daughter." And I thought, she's going to think I'm crazy as hell for not knowing who she was. So I went out and found her and told her that we were honored to have her there and that she was welcome at Graceland. A little later, Priscilla told me that Caroline wanted to see Elvis's trophy room. I said I couldn't show it to her right then, but that if she stayed until the day after the funeral, I would do it. As far as I know, Caroline didn't stay. Because I was dazed with shock and misery, I didn't see or recognize some of the people at the funeral. Anne Margaret and I hugged each other and cried together, but I didn't even see her husband, Roger Smith, who was close by. During Elvis's 22-year career, Colonel Parker handled the show business side of his life, while I tried to handle Elvis's personal affairs. Now that he is gone, I will continue to look after his affairs until all unfinished business has been attended to. I can move into Graceland now because my mother and my sister have lived there for years and need someone with them. Also, it might be easier for me to handle Elvis's unfinished business from inside Graceland than from my current home. We received permission from the city of Memphis to move Elvis's body to Graceland, where security is easier to maintain. I also brought Elvis's mother back home to be buried there. If possible, Elvis's baby brother Jesse will be moved from Mississippi to lie beside them. Elvis sometimes spoke about bringing his twin's body to Memphis, and I may go ahead with his plan. To go back to what I said at the beginning of this story, I am more heartbroken than I can express about Elvis's death. But I am comforted by the sure knowledge that my son was a gift from God, and his life was always in God's hands. From one point of view, I would have liked him to live forever, but I know that his early death, like his whole life, was a part of God's plan. I thank God that He blessed me with such a son.
Hearing Vernon Presley speak with such candor just a few months after the greatest tragedy of his life gives us a human dimension that fame often hides. This wasn't just a testimony about the King of Rock, it was the final act of love of a father trying to protect his son's memory. If this documentary touched you or helped you better understand the true story behind the headlines, I ask that you leave a like. It is a simple gesture, but it helps this content reach other fans who deserve to know this truth. And don't forget, our conversation continues in the comments. I read everything, and I really want to know your opinion on Vernon's revelations. If you like in-depth content that treats music history with the respect it deserves, subscribe to the channel now and turn on the notification bell. We have many other historical files to open together. Finally, share this video with that friend or family member who never stops listening to Elvis. I'm sure they will thank you for knowing this side of the story. The legacy lives on through us. Thank you very much for your company, and see you next time.